Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this series, we go through the scripture, but not just read it. We want to understand what it means for us today. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're in Genesis chapter 6. And in Genesis chapter 6, we have what is called an embedded narrative within the larger story of the flood that God is going to bring about because of how wicked humanity has become. This passage is talking about the origin of the Nephilim. And the word Nephilim actually appears here twice. Once in verse 4, and then again in verse 8. The Nephilim are described as the giants that are the sons of Anakim, and it is believed that these giants were the offspring of the union between human beings and fallen angels. So let's break this down and see what this means for us today. So let's start off with verse 1. It says it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Now, who are these sons of God that are described here? Well, the Hebrew word translated sons of God is Ben Elohim, and this phrase is used several times throughout the book of Genesis to refer to Seth and his descendants, the line of Seth, which is in contrast to the line of Cain, the descendants of Adam and Eve's firstborn son, Cain, who were known as the wicked ones. So it's important to understand that these aren't necessarily divine beings, but rather God's children. They are called sons of God because they are God's offspring, just like we are also called God's children because we believe in Jesus, who is the Son of God. And so what do? Well, they see the daughters of men and they take wives for themselves. In other words, they marry these women. And this would have been forbidden because if you remember back in chapter 2, when God created Adam, he told him, "You shall leave your father and mother and be joined to your wife, and you shall become one flesh." Genesis 2:24. So they weren't supposed to marry sisters, but they did anyway. And the word for forbidden here is the Hebrew word reah, which speaks of something being unclean or ritually impure. But the context here shows that it doesn't necessarily mean that it was completely off limits, because in Genesis 20 we read that Abraham, who was a descendant of Seth, married his half-sister, although this was something that was frowned upon. It also seems that there was an intermingling of the lines of Seth and Enos. And it's believed that this is where we get the origin of the Nephilim, which is spoken of in verse 4. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, the Nephilim are mentioned a couple other places in the Old Testament, once in Numbers chapter 13, and then again in Deuteronomy chapter 2. And they seem to have been a race of giants. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew word naphal, which means to fall, and so they are sometimes translated as the fallen ones. The Bible tells us that they were the sons of Anakim, which means that they were probably tall and strong, because the Anakim were known for being tall and strong, as it says in Deuteronomy 20, a nation of giants, the Rephaim, the Anakim, who came after the giants, were described as men of great size. So they were big, tall people. And so what happened to them? Well, as it says here in verse 8, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. So Noah is contrasted with the Nephilim, just like Seth was also contrasted with the Nephilim. And notice the threefold description of Noah here, because this is important. It says that he was found. He was just. He was perfect, and he walked with God. So justice, perfection, and fellowship with God are marks of those who are in right standing with God. So what do we learn from this passage? Well, first, we learn that God still has children here on earth, and they are those who are born of his Spirit. Second, we learn that God's children should not associate with the world. For even though marriage between close relatives was allowed in certain circumstances, it was frowned upon, and God's children should not participate in things that the world participates in. Third, we learn that there is such a thing as an unholy union, and when a person is born of two different spirits, sometimes the results can be pretty disastrous, just like when you mix oil and water. And lastly, we learn that there will always be people on earth who are giants, and some of those giants are not even people, but rather things like pride, fear, worry, anxiety, anger, lust, greed, etc. But the good news is that we have a God who is greater than any giant that we might face. So I hope this helps. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching.